introduction to a sample analysis, mostly focusing on opiates. And it might end a bit before 4, but just we end at 4. So a bit about FTIR. I know it's a lot of words, but I will try to make it interesting for non-chemists. FTIR is short for Fourier Transform Infrared Spectroscopy. And FTIR works by having a broadband light source, like a tungsten halogen lamp, shine onto the sample with varying wavelengths using a moving mirror and a fixed mirror, so that the different wavelengths of light hit the sample. Wow.
I'm glad you see Fourier transform, because I turned that shit to field test.
I mean, I feel like that works, right? Field testing.
It works.
So the instrument will measure the amount of infrared radiation that was not absorbed by the sample and reaches the detector. So if you have a sample right above your diamond crystal right here, whatever light, infrared light, whatever wavelengths are not absorbed by the sample, will go to the detector. And you can read what is detected, and by reading what is detected, you will know what was absorbed. And by knowing what was absorbed, you will be able to identify what compounds are present. So each compound has a unique absorption behavior, and this is dependent on what functional groups are present in a given chemical. So,
quick question.
yes.
So being though we're using the aluminum caps, does the reflection play a part in that at all?
Good question. Because aluminum is an element on the periodic table, it's just aluminum. There's nothing else in it. There's no chemical bonds formed. That doesn't impact at all. It doesn't absorb any specific wavelength of light that will impact what you are looking at. So the aluminum is nice.
Embarrassing question. Follow up on flavor. Does it matter which side of the wheel you use? If it's the shiny side or the bottom side?
Nope.
Okay.
Either side is good.
I was like, I'm glad you guys.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
So yeah. So Bruker FTIR equipment always comes with, or if it doesn't come with it, you could buy Opus or other FTIR spectra analyses that are available out there. So using Opus, it'll take those wavelengths that were detected by the detector and make a spectra. And that spectra, which I'll give a brief, can look like this. And this, as I said, was unique to a given compound. And you can compare that spectra to spectras that are in databases. So there's a bunch of different databases out there, but like ECCSU has a ton of different chemicals in it, and if fentanyl or xylazine or cocaine are in that, and you have that library at your disposal, you can compare what you have in your spectra to the spectra in the database. So it's basically doing, not guess and check, but you're like comparing your spectra. And Opus tries to do a good job of saying, oh, I see you have peaks at this place, cocaine has peaks at this place, this might be cocaine. And that is generally how Opus works. So a bit more about FTIR. The peaks are on the spectra are indicative of the different functional groups. So, and different functional groups, we can comment present differently, that doesn't sound quite. But there are tons and tons of functional groups, and no two chemicals are alike, as probably everyone knows. But this is normal fentanyl, which it's not an analog, it's fentanyl's chemical structure. This, but this functional group has a specific known peak at 1662 wave numbers approximately. And that 1662 is very specific, but it can shift higher or lower on this x-axis depending on what else is in the sample. So for example, if you have baking soda in the sample in addition to fentanyl, it might shift that fentanyl a little upfield or a little downfield. So it's not going to always be exactly 1662, but it's probably going to be between like 1600 and 1700, around there. So, and then because this is the fentanyl spectra, because I chose to present it, the most dominant or prominent peak in this spectra is the one that presents at 1662. So it's the most like defining feature in this given spectra. So if you have a sample with, let's say, a cut, just like some sugar and fentanyl, you're going to be looking specifically for this fentanyl peak. But let's say you have 90% sugar and 10% fentanyl. All these peaks are going to be squished down to like 10% of their actual like overall height. So, but the one that will be sticking out the most will be the 1600 peak. So if you see a peak, even if it's rather small at between 16 and 1700, there's a suspicion that it might be fentanyl. Or another compound with this functional group. But this is a rather unique functional group, and there's not many drugs other than fentanyl and its analogs. And if I'm remembering correctly, 4-fluorofentanyl will basically have this exact same spectrum, but there's a fluorine either, I can't remember, I should know this, but either a fluorine here or a fluorine there, depending on.
What's the lobster?
I don't know, is Tracy here?
It's
No.
It's a mass thing. I mean, I see the TA.
Yeah, that's what you have it like in a square. That's what the lobster called.
Oh.
Yeah, right there.
Like
So-
on the, oh.
But the two peaks themselves look like a claw.
Yeah, like this, like a the scissors.
There's one long and one short.
Oh,
Good luck.
So Tracy wrote that last night, and I thought, okay.
That's a creative interpretation.
Came from the radio.
I saw TA and I was like, that's a mess.
I think that's a Vancouver thing, actually.
Mm.
Yeah, there's
So, as we said, some people will report donating pure fentanyl. It will never look like this. I've never seen a sample that looks anything close to this.
No.
But in theory, if you had, this is like a lab grade specific pure fentanyl synthesis for the purposes of drug checking and other things. So all these other peaks are in theory going to be able to be seen, but when it's in a low concentration, you'll be looking for that. I will talk about this less because just need to know like, the output of it, but GCMS, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, there's other methods as well that are more expensive and more high-tech, like LC-QTOF. But GCMS is you use gas chromatography, use an inert chemical gas, heat it in an oven in a really, really long, really narrow capillary column, at which point you'll send the compound with its inert gas into an ionization source, and essentially you'll get a different looking mass spectrum that you'll be able to identify compounds. So it's just a different chemical method used to identify stuff, and this is more than you need to know, and more than even I need to know for FTIR purposes. But this is exactly what Earth and Fire and other confirmatory labs do. But despite all this, people can look at this and tell you in great detail what was in a given substance. So this is what DDL looks like. It's all public information. This sample, for example, was submitted in Greenfield. Oh, there's an A-Hope sample. Nice. This one was submitted as crack. It's cocaine and methylcognidyne, which is a crack cocaine degradant. It's in a ratio of 10 to 1. They don't give exact quantification values. They just give a ratio of the active components. The data was recorded and the location. And then you can click on this, the cracker, the drugs data, to receive more information about it. This is our unique identifier code that we keep track of, and then also if you click on it, it'll show the sample bag ID. So there's 2 ways to confirm that it is that impact sample. One cool thing that is very, very helpful with GCMS that I mentioned earlier is for this example, it was reported as dope. It's 20 parts fentanyl, 1 part 4-AMPP, which is a fentanyl synthesis precursor, which is still active, and xylazine. So it's 20 to 1 to 1. On the FTIR, you probably, very, very likely will not be able to see xylazine. 4-AMPP is very structurally similar to fentanyl as it is, so 4-AMPP's spectra will completely underlie fentanyl's spectra. So you're not going to be able to identify 4-AMPP either. You'll just see fentanyl or a fentanyl analog or a fentanyl synthesis precursor is what you will be able to see. But in GCMS, it's able to go to much greater lengths to identify low concentration compounds in a given sample. So even though it's 20 parts fentanyl to 1 part xylazine, the GCMS will still pick this up. And there's even greater examples like this one. It was 25 parts caffeine, 1 part xylazine. You cannot see that in FTIR. There's just no way. Because it has a detection limit of about 5%. Some people say 3 to 4, but 3 to 5. So this is GCMS data and what you can report it back as. Any questions?
What did you see in that last one? You think we're gonna have TIR?
That is a good question. I probably would have seen caffeine and fentanyl, and that's probably it. Maybe diphenhydramine, which is Benadryl, but maybe not. And part of the reason is caffeine. I'll get into this later too, but let's say you have mostly caffeine in the sample, or this is majority caffeine, maybe half. Those caffeine peaks are gonna be about 50% of your spectrum. Like those will be making like 50% of your height of your spectrum. And if fentanyl has similarly located peaks as caffeine, they're just gonna like appear like within the caffeine peaks. So you're not gonna be able to accurately identify that it was fentanyl with caffeine. You'll just say it's caffeine and something else that has similar peaks to caffeine, but maybe fentanyl. And there's quite a few, sadly, there's quite a few structures or compounds like that that make it really, really hard to identify, which is why you really need GCMS. For example, xylazine. I'll go into it more later as well. But xylazine, the location of the peaks, even in relatively high concentration, pretty hard to tell differently from fentanyl.
Bummer.
Yeah, which is not great. So,
But it's absolutely fascinating.
Because you have the difference of like their actual like organic compound structure and then like how they hit with different people. There's so many different things. That's why you got more organic chemistry.
yeah. Then just a quick comparison between FTIR and GCMS. FTIR is cheaper, relatively, it's not cheap. It's a lot quicker, limit detection about 5%. It's really great for cuts and additives, especially different types of sugars and differentiating those different types of sugars. Like you can have mannitol, lactose, sucrose, glucose.
Do you have examples of how those read on the spectra, like the xylazine and the study?
Yes.
Okay.
You mean like a pure spectra or within like given samples?
Examples, both.
Yes.
Okay.
So one cool thing is when you purchase the library, or like you get Bruker's Opus library. Yeah, just jump to it now. Just answer. So this is basically what a library will look like, and you can go through all these to see them. But they will show you this is what xylazine looks like, and then you can click on another one.
Yeah, you can show us how to do that, because we used to try to figure out how to get into the library for a long time.
Oh sure. You have value.
You had this one.
Library browser.
Listen, I use it for what I need to use it for.
Evaluate library browser, and then these are the different libraries that we have access to. So then, like, I'll jump over to Georgia Crime Lab.
Oh, so you just open it.
Yep.
Smart. Okay. Duh.
And then it will load all those that are in Georgia Crime Lab.
Maybe like I like hit like a button and then all of a sudden like what the fuck's happening? Like it freaks out. So I I'm trying to no. I don't fuck
So I
around.
don't feel bad.
Yeah.
Nope.
Oh, that's helpful.
It is helpful. But PCCUSU also has like a guide of like the most common cuts and shit. So
Yeah. So, for example, this is heroin.
never gonna see that.
Yeah, Western Mass.
Yeah,
Yeah. And just for reference, Georgia Crime Lab did all of their samples in potassium bromide plates. Doesn't mean anything, it's just how they did it. I don't know why they noted it in every single thing instead of just saying heroin HCl, but they did. So you can ignore in KBR for every single for them. But that's that. So they, you are able to see, those are like pure standard grade, like 100% made for that. And then also you can see them in samples. And we will go through those at the end of this presentation. Any other questions?
If you have a sample and FTIR and it has heroin and fentanyl, the peaks, are they different peaks or are they kind of similar?
They're different. They are definitely distinguishable. They are similar in some ways. And we can go through that in more detail. They're actually, I don't know if I picked a sample for today that has heroin and fentanyl, but I can write that down for tomorrow. You want to see that? Or?
No, I'm just going to figure it out.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think that's the actual heroin,
Yeah. There was one.
By mistake.
Yeah. No, literally, it's by mistake. No, we ain't even kidding, like, it's a surprise, like, people think that they're going to get fentanyl, and now there's actually, like, real dope in it again. It's
Yeah, I've had people be like, this shit is really bad, it made me itchy, and
Yeah, like that's
bro, it's
dope,
heroin.
bro.
And they're like, what? I hated it. And
I
you're
don't
like,
like that shit.
So you hear Jess says she sees it all, she sees it here, she sees it all.
There was actually, now that I remember, we were just in Northampton, back in Onion, and one sample came back. Looks like 90% heroin with like 10% fentanyl.
That's
Damn.
So I can, but that's just like a guess. It's just like a lot of heroin, and like, there's like, oh, there's fentanyl too, but it's,
That's awesome.
I can show you guys. It's interesting. I'm waiting for the confirmatory results, but. Back to FTIR, really good for cuts and additives, like sugars, the cuts like that. FTIR also, we can train you completely how to do all of this in about 2 days. GCMS, a lot harder, and a lot more chemistry background to know, and a lot more effort, so it's just easier to send over confirmatory testing. And then GCMS, much more expensive. The machine itself, a lot more expensive, but sending out samples is also still expensive. Has really great specificity, so it's able to, like I said, do that like 25-to-1 ratio or even better. It's slower. It doesn't have to be that much slower. 2 weeks is long, partially because they're based out in California and they're busy. But NMS labs, I would imagine get it back in like a week.
Yeah, they also do rush results for us, so we've gotten like, when we've had like overdose surges, we can get a 2-hour turnaround time. And
Wow.
they'll do like 24 to 48 hours as well.
Wow.
Wait, what? You have a GCM? What?
In our
NMS lab, so they'll do, if we ask for like rush results, they can do 24 to 48 hours.
That's
as
fucking awesome.
Yeah, and if we drive them up there directly and have like an issue, they'll do a couple hours.
Like the GCMS itself to like run a sample is like
That's
probably like 2 hours. So they probably just like shove to the front of the line, do it, and then tell you.
He's literally met me there at like 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and then like I'll get these to you in a few hours. That's
That's really awesome. So we don't have that.
Nope.
But
You're really
good
good.
on you. Slower. It's less helpful for cuts. It can tell that there's a sugar in there, but it typically can't break it down anymore because all sugars have a very similar compound. So, it's sugar, but not much beyond that, which is why FTIR is pretty nice for differentiating between different types of sugars. And then lastly, if you have any like weird stuff, for example, like we had some synthetic cannabinoids floating around ADB Budnaka. No FTIR library has that. FTIR is not like the global standard for identifying new compounds. So, going to the GCMS spectrums will give you a better chance with identifying that given compound. And especially like, just like newer psychoactive substances in general. There will be more spectrums in GCMS libraries than there are in FTIR libraries, and GCMS libraries are updated way more frequently. They're like kind of like the gold standard because of that specificity. It's just greater detail, so that's typically what they use. But FTIR libraries are being updated constantly and are developing constantly. Any questions? All right, so
You all had 2 machines at one time, right? Yes.
My DMX, now it's a fucking paperweight.
I haven't heard avoid that at all costs, mostly from you.
Yeah. That's a paperweight. Yeah.
So just a bit on how to navigate and use Opus. These are just some like kind of tips and tricks that I'll run through. Then I'll actually like pull up Opus and we can go through some. But examining different areas of the spectrum. So as I mentioned, if you know you're looking for fentanyl, you can either tell Opus, hey, look at this entire spectra and say, what does this entire spectra look like? But if you're looking for fentanyl and you know the most prominent peak will be around 1600, you can say, hey, Opus, just look in this section and see if this looks like fentanyl. Fentanyl's library structure at 1600, which is very, very helpful. And that is like the most common thing I do. Like every single sample, I do that.
So can you ask it to look for multiple substances?
Multiple substances.
Yeah, like say fentanyl and valine, like in a sample, or do you have to retest that same sample and then next time say, look, there's valine or whatever, however it shows up.
So when you test the sample in the IR, you get a spectra, and then you don't have to recreate that spectra at all. You just have to fiddle around in Opus. And when I say, oh, look at 1600, for example, it's going to tell me like the top 100 hits in all of my libraries that it looks most like. So it could be like fentanyl, heroin, xylazine, and it'll list them down. I think it'll make more sense when I.
It's like a fucking bunch of Russian nesting dolls, right? So like, except the fucking outer Russian doll is like fucking fentanyl, and then you subtract that, take the fucking whatever, like you throw that aside. There's like another little Russian, you know, like the nesting dolls, like one side of the other. Like, oh, that's fucking xylazine. You take that apart, you throw it over, like over your fucking shoulder, and then it's like, oh, this mannitol. Like you can do it, but it's by subtraction.
Yeah, and to answer your question, you would look, because you're looking in two different sections. So for the fentanyl, you would search that section, so you would have to do a different search for the xylazine. Because you're looking at a different part of that spectrum.
It's really hard to explain. Like
It's all within the same initial search, but you can go back and look at certain parts of
So
that.
you have a snapshot, you just take a different, you got
Yeah.
one snapshot, you're taking different looks at the picture.
Yeah, so now you're looking with that square there, you're looking at fentanyl, and you pull it back and say, okay, now I want to look between
What's left now?
35 and
What's
2,000.
left? You took it out, what's left?
dolls,
Yeah.
that's a good
Alright.
analogy.
Well, that's a whole nother thing, to take something out and then see what's left, that's a whole nother process. This is just searching certain parts of the whole
I don't think it's actually
scheme.
that part though.
Well, that's what he said, like,
Oh.
if you pull something out, like if you take out fentanyl,
Yeah.
and then you see the spectrum, and then, okay, what that scan looks like, and then you can look at it.
Yeah,
that
subtract
way.
it.
Yeah.
That's an option. I don't like it as much, but.
Yeah.
You know, searching through.
And layered.
So this is just like pure fentanyl,
Yes.
but we're only focusing on, like, what's the rest of the guys on the left and the right?
So, for example, this.
Is it just like different parts of the compound?
So like this isn't accurate, but basically this can represent these
Yeah.
peaks. This pyridine ring can be like these peaks, and all like each like this carbon, this carbon, this carbon, this carbon, this nitrogen will actually show up on multiple parts of the spectrum. So like it can show up in a peak here, a peak here, a peak here, a peak here. So like this peak alone doesn't necessarily just coordinate with this. It could be multiple different carbons within. And
It's just those carbon parts.
yes.
Okay.
Actually, in this area is like carbon nitrogen. But nice. Yeah. So yeah. Exactly.
The peak is just like the image of like the organic chemistry sort of picture of it. Like that little square part of like the oxygen and the nitrogen is like that lobster claw.
I'm trying to go back to the last chemistry class I took when I was like 17 years old.
Yeah.
Trying not to fall asleep.
Uh-huh.
So is that little red box, is it the whole thing the fentanyl, or the little red box is the fentanyl?
This whole thing is
That whole
fentanyl.
thing is fentanyl, okay.
Yes. This is just the
But
unique
that's the part that's,
causing this specific.
Oh.
So it shows us like, hey, that's fentanyl because of that little part.
I don't have that experience.
oh, this is the part that makes it different from the rest of the.
I think it's someone who did organic chemistry, that's how I would know.
Okay,
What?
okay.
I was like, I
Never
never
guess.
guessed. We didn't send one.
Any other questions?
So that's how I know. I say with like the security stuff.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, I know. I used to just information.
But otherwise I got.
That's totally.
So,
Well, you're gonna love this.
examining the different areas of the spectrum, like as you said, like 3,400 to 4,000 is really helpful. Looking at like just 1,600, 1,700 is very helpful. Another thing you can do is checking and unchecking different libraries. So Bruker, I don't know if this comes standard, but they give you 4 pharma libraries. So if you have anything that looks like a pharmaceutical drug that looks legit, you should check those pharma libraries because they will most likely be very accurate if it is a true pill. Like you will just come up like, oh, 988 hit quality. It's like, oh, this is a perfect match to what you'd see in a pharmaceutical grade pill of this sort. But if you have anything that's not pharmaceutical, typically keeping those pharma libraries unchecked will help you because that pharma library is very big and it'll just like swamp out stuff. So it's like, ooh, this might be this, and it just kind of leads you down the wrong path. It just tricks you. Changing the hit quality, that's common. If you have like a really unclean sample or a thing with a ton of different chemicals in it,
Would you,
lowering the hit quality.
I'm sorry, would you use the pharma library, when would you keep that checked? In what circumstance? Like any pill, any
Pills.
crust?
Not necessarily any crust. If it is real. One thing you will notice when you crush a pill is if it's real, it's a lot harder to crush.
That's true.
So it's really.
And Tracy told me real pills roll. You can roll a real pill.
What is that?
Like,
I don't know,
Like a
I never
round
knew what
pill?
she meant. Was she here?
What is that?
Meaning like,
What if they're
everything
square?
inside,
Yeah.
the ingredients are distributed, like equally. Whereas they say fentanyl binds
Chocolate
to
chips,
itself,
yeah.
chocolate chips, so I don't know. That means one part of it might be heavy, so it just kind of allows.
Oh. That makes sense.
Sounds like I got pills that are freaking square, so how that works.
I feel like before, if I had something I thought was a real pill, before I threw it on an FTIR, I would just punch in the code, I would do a pill lookup, because I feel like it would be a waste of my time.
But a lot of people get the pill press to have that number on it now.
The prices are
Right,
really
no, but if I can
good.
tell, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh, yeah.
like, yeah.
And same with I mean, not all of them are coded, but usually there's some sort of coding. Like when someone's like, "Oh, this is a real pill," and I see it in a bag where it's just covered in loose powder from the pill, and it's like eroded. I'm like, I don't know about that, man.
Yeah.
What's a little staple?
Sounds like-
Want to take you off, have like parents coming to them like with pills they found in their kids' room and shit, asking to have it tested.
Does that happen with us?
Does that happen?
Not really.
Like,
We're
I
like,
think
you
you
know,
get
it's
the
coming in
college
that
kids
just
doing
about
it.
two pills from random.
No, but we'll get random people sometimes that come in and test pills that we.
Yeah, we
normally
get like the
don't.
college kids themselves, like.
Yeah,
That's what I was.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Especially now with people being worried about counterfeit Adderall, and that being so prominent there.
Zany, heavy, like.
And just testing random pills that someone comes in, that's again one of these things that the FTIR is
Yeah, I think we'll probably talk more about it tomorrow. Like, it can be really difficult even with the pharma libraries on. Like, there have been at least, like, with us, like, there have been a few times where we could say, like, definitively this is or it isn't. Do you know what I mean? Like, for various reasons. Like, a lot of times, like, you find it not by the active ingredient, but by, like, what it's, so if it's, like, stearic acid or, like, all these different things that, like, you know, we get to, like, go online, like, or what are the fucking, you know, cuts or what are the fillers that are put in pharmaceutical pills for, like, say, like a 2 milligram Xanax or whatever, right? So, like, we know we had that list and then we're kind of looking through it. Like, if we see, like, 3 or 4 of those lists and, like, kind of, like, can deduce, like, what the fillers are, and that is what the fillers are usually used by, like, in a pill, then, like, we can probably say, like, with some degree of confidence, but we never say, like, yes, it's real, no, it's not real. You know what I
Because
mean?
even with the pharmacy pills, the active ingredient is so low that the FTIR is not going to pick up on it anyway,
Yeah.
even if it's real.
Right.
So
Like
we're only determining the cuts.
the fillers.
So the cuts are what, because those are a higher value, so we can just pick
Yeah.
out from that and it's like, okay, this matches up close enough, then we can say, well, it should be this, but we're not going to,
I mean, somebody brings you an oxy to test positive for fentanyl. You can say definitively that it's fucking not real. But like aside from that, like it's been, I don't know, like Cole, like what your thoughts are on that, but like we've had a lot of difficulty.
Especially for pills, the thing you're gonna see the absolute most of is cellulose. It is
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
polyacrylic
yeah.
pills, and it's gonna be like 90% cellulose. And
Yeah.
hopefully you're able to see like the pharma active ingredient based on the pharma library, but you still have to like get through, because cellulose itself, you'll see later, is this massive swath of peaks that will just cover everything,
Yeah.
which is super inconvenient for you.
Are the benzo strips more sensitive for that than the FTIR?
but what benzo strips, you get false positives, it's that.
No, but BTX are for benzo, so like yeah, like they're much more sensitive than the FTIR. Like it's like trace amounts. FTIR, you're very rarely are you gonna see any kind of benzo because they're so potent in such small amounts.
And
But we use a benzo. So if somebody brings us a Xanax bar, we test it. We really can't fucking say one way or another. Like all right, like I don't see anything active. Like we always test it with a benzo test strip, and if it comes back positive, we can say there's a benzo in it. We just can't tell you what fucking benzo it is, or like we can't even see like the relative proportion of it because you can't really. It's so tiny. It's such a tiny amount. Like you're not going to be able to catch on the FTIR. So that's like one of the reasons why we always try to send like at least some portion of the pill to the drug data so we can get a better sense of like what the market looks like. Like regime or bromazepam or fluoprazolam or whatever, you know. But it's just pills are hard. They're always going to be a little hard.
And it's hard to get a signal.
Yeah, that's also true.
The initial signals.
So when we get to a point where we know that a lot more counterfeits are going to start to show up, would there be anything that stands out that we can, seek to identify that? Like, or is that something we're looking to find out as a result of all the testing we're doing? Somebody goes, oh shit, I found.
Probably that.
I mean, the thing that sucks about this is that like you can never say definitively anything. Like this is to the best of my knowledge what I can see in this sample, like what the fucking FTIR is telling me, right? But it's not catching anything under 4 or 5% or whatever it is, or like pills are really hard to identify. Like I feel like a lot of us go into drug checking and like we assume or hope at least, right, that like we're gonna get accurate information down to a T, right? And we would give it with 100-degree confidence, like, to our people, but like half of the shit that we talk to our people about is that, like, listen, like, there's a lot of fucking caveats. Like, the FTIR doesn't see this, it doesn't see that, and like, we can't tell you what type of fentanyl it is. Like, someone's like, I got carfentanil, I'm like, I'll never be able to fucking tell. I'm not gonna see fentanyl, but I can tell you, like, what kind of fentanyl it is. Like, so, like, it's just, there's a lot of limitations that, like, are never gonna allow us, unless the software changes drastically over the next couple of years, like, with 100-degree of confidence, anything. So, like, that's, like, one thing you should always be going into, like, before checking stuff. It sucks. Like, I hate not being able to tell people, but, like, it's true.
You have 10 different machines that you can run all of your shit through.
Yeah, it's not perfect. It's just something. This is what I can see in this particular sample, but it doesn't mean that there's not a ton of other shit in, like, a very poorly mixed, like, they're not homogeneous, right? So even a baggie or whatever, or pills especially, like.
Even just like minor differences, they will not be the exact same. They're like,
Yeah.
unless it's perfect.
Pharmaceuticals we can run against for
Well, yeah, pills, like, pharmaceuticals are not all homogeneous either. Like, it's not perfect.
Any other?
I mean, the great thing about, like, the inconsistent drug supply, like, in Boston, like, there are very consistent cuts, right? So, like, it's inconsistent in the fact that, like, it's never regulated. You're really, like, it's like a fucking box of chocolate. You know what you're gonna get, you know? But at the same time, like, you know that there's likely gonna be lactose mannitol and fentanyl, or lactose inositol and coke, or whatever, you know what I mean? Or like, you know, you see phenacetin and cocaine. Like, you start to see patterns, right? And so, like, that makes sense. So I can say with a higher degree of confidence, like, this fits in with what I can see. You know what I mean?
So changing the quality, as I mentioned, will, let's say you have like 5 different samples in it, and the Opus software isn't able to get a good guess on any of them because it's too mixed. You can lower the hit quality, and that might be able to let you see a better thing. But before doing that, I would rather go to examining different areas in the spectrum.
What does that mean, lower the hit quality? I'm not familiar with that.
So that one, so typically our hit quality is like, it has, I don't know how to describe it too well.
You can show me tomorrow too.
Okay.
It's too hard to describe because I understand. Like, you're doing an excellent job of describing stuff that's very fucking difficult. I would just be like, look at the screens.
I was gonna say, same thing, I think you're doing a great job verbalizing like images, but I would just be like, how about I show you tomorrow, and then you can,
It's like trying to play Pictionary, except like you're fucking, you got that mark between your knees. Yeah, it's really, really hard to describe.
Yeah, I can show it tomorrow. Subtracting different chemicals, we got on that a little side note. So let's say you have 90%, like something that looks like almost like pure lactose and something else. Like you're like, oh, there's some other piece in there, I'm not sure. Opus lets you subtract a chemical. So it knows its library. So you can then say, Opus, subtract the library standard of lactose from this sample that we have. And then it will show you all the residual peaks. But those residual peaks suck. To put it bluntly, it doesn't help you much.
Okay.
Unless it's still better to go to examine different areas of the spectrum. And just like, honestly, like, it helps in some ways, in some instances, but it's definitely not the first thing I could do. It would be great if it could, it's just it's too finicky of a baseline to actually be helpful for you. I wish it wasn't, but it is what it is. You know? If it could be better, that'd be perfect, ideally. It's not this, it is this, it's this, and this, and then you can just go through like the cookie.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's not. So another thing is improve the quality of your scan. I actually learned this recently at BNHC. I think I also mentioned it earlier today, is you can have the scan be complete, i.e. like measured in like 20 to 30 seconds. That's like typically what ours is set to. And that is saying how many scans it takes per second. It's like 4 scans per second. So, and the more scans you have per second, or the longer amount of time you're willing to wait, the higher quality resolution your spectra will be. So that's one thing that I didn't realize. I was like, wow, BMH's spectra are so crispy. And they're like, oh, it took another 20 seconds to do it. So depending on how you fiddle with those specific parameters, change your spectra a little bit. But it shouldn't limit you. You can still do like the quickest spectra and still be able to match it up. It just might, for like really small quantities of fentanyl, for example, you might be able to see it a little better if you have a higher resolution scan.
Yeah, can you show us that tomorrow?
Yes, I just learned it, so yeah.
That's cool. That's like 102. I'm digging that. I'm gonna try that.
Then the last thing, the don't be fooled. Opus wants to trick you. Opus is just a software. It's just looking at the peaks that are there and it's just trying to line up it the best that it can. It will be very consistently wrong. Never take the first hit as accurate. It might be. It's great when it is, but the vast majority of the time it might not. So just don't trust the first hit. Like, I'll do a few examples where the first hit's just some random chemical.
Crazy shit.
Yeah, that you will never ever see.
Licorice. Like, I don't think licorice is in this fucking bro.
Exactly.
Just like in the pocket, like just rubbing it against the red vine.
Yeah, it's not that sensitive.
Yeah. No, it's just.
No, like that would like crazy. Like it's like it's just like an option. You're like speak to number. It's like I think you said hang up. And it's
Yeah.
like, no motherfuckers.
Yes. Just completely different.
Keeps guessing. Yeah, it's just this is the first stuff actually.
So basically it's all about experience, navigating Opus and having access to enough libraries that you'll see the chemicals that you expect to see in your drug supply. Because like, if there's only a few FDR libraries that actually have xylazine, even though it's becoming pretty common. It's like, oh, these are, like, you have to have that one checked if you have any chance of seeing xylazine.
Yeah, we're at like 86% of xylazine, like, no, not like in it, I'm talking about like 86% of like our real overdoses have xylazine, like also in the product community. Like,
That's what those see.
yeah, that's what they're saying.
What's OCM?
I was like, all of, we live in a world of airlines. Oh my god.
So, this is tips and tricks. And there's definitely a lot more. And there's still things I'm trying to learn with Opus. Like, I was experienced or taught a different software program. So like, there's some overlap, and there's some things that I know how to do just because of chemistry, but there's so much to learn. There's so many intricacies in this given software.
And just messing around with it a lot.
Yeah. Which isn't downfalls and downsides. But I'll start with inactives. These are like kind of the most common. Please add any if you know. I missed one myself. Inositol, lactose, mannitol, mannitol, cellulose, and sucrose are probably the ones I see the most for the most part. Especially cellulose for pills. Then the actives you are most likely to identify correctly or feel confident about is meth for sure, cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, phenazine, xylazine, propane, caffeine. Caffeine, I don't know about other states, but it's a really common cut in Canada for fentanyl, and it's becoming more common in Mass.
And you make it a bitch to try to find fentanyl, because there's so many overlapping peaks, it's a pain in the ass. We just had a sample the other day, like actually, I wish maybe I can find it and then, you bring it up, because it was tough to like try to figure out, because you can also estimate like, or use the subtraction, whatever the fuck it is, to like estimate the proportional, whatever.
Ratio of the two.
And I was like, it just, caffeine fucked it all up, it was really difficult.
Yeah, caffeine's another compound with a really just abundant spectra.
Right.
Because of its chemical nature, which sucks when it has a cut, because then you can't see any of the other active stuff sometimes.
I don't know if you put it under cocaine, but the crack freebase, that definitely comes up as pretty prominent itself.
And then crack degradants like love of my soul, touch my soul, tropicane. But yeah, those are prominent. Any others? Those for the most part. So we're gonna go through some samples now. We'll go unknown 1.
I was like,
Are people doing okay? Do you want a break?
Yeah, we can take a quick break. I think this is the last. Oh, don't do that.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, quick break or?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Everybody trying to get down on practice tonight?
What for?
That meeting?
What meeting?
they were.
Some people left that were heading there.
Yeah, it's the
The
Rhode Island like kickoff.
Oh, yeah. I don't think I was invited to that, Mark.
It will be on Zoom.
Just kidding.
Yeah, it's supposed to be
Zoom.
on Zoom.
Yeah.
What is it kick off for what?
The harm reduction.
Oh,
The harm
that's
reduction
awesome. Oh shit, that's really cool.
If you're interested, what would you guys?
Yeah, Ken, do you mind?
Yeah,
That would be awesome.
Mark originally literally wanted us to be here to try to go,
Yeah.
but it's like 2 hours to get there.
I
And
feel
then,
like the
and
traffic.
then
It's
with,
really bad.
yeah, and then with traffic.
Yeah, if it was in Providence, like if the initial.
Well, this was supposed to be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so that's-
go.
so that's
I
why
would
we
have
had
absolutely gone. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we said we might. Mark's trying to get dinner with Gary Langs.
For those of you who haven't seen this, when you open Opus, it's going to ask for an admin password. It's just all caps Opus. And If anyone has trouble getting into it tomorrow, I can show you. But this is what Spectra looks like. It's actually really zoomed in right now. But we are able to load our sample of interest, which was NT overdose, which I did.
So it's like a fun little puzzle where you have to like pick apart little pieces and I mean not fun, probably frustrating puzzle, but definitely at times fun.
This one's fun. This one makes me feel good.
Like other ones make me not feel as good.
Yeah, you get to the point where you'll pull up the scan and you're like,
That's what I mean, yeah, like you're saying like with the caffeine and fentanyl, I'm like, oh Jesus, and that's a cheap cut too, so that's not easy.
yeah.
So this first one was one from man over in Quincy. Yeah, okay. I always mix up Quincy and them, so we're having to do it.
I think
So
both cities would be offended.
so you hit load, and then it'll show you your most recently opened scans, but you can also file name search. So this is that unique identifier code, so like Rockton BNC underscore the 4-digit code. And the .0 is just Opus software. You can ignore that. But that's the letter code, number.
If you do have the same label, it gets messed up, doesn't it? It does like a 1, which is not openable. It's very strange. Can you talk about that for a second?
Sure. So you have to, one reason we really try to keep track of our number and letter codes to make sure they're unique is if you have an overlap, let's say you do like 0001 twice, that second 0001 will either overwrite the first one and you lose the first scan, or it just won't go through. So you lose one of the scans. So trying to make sure you don't have an overlapping or copied identifier code is good.
If I have to rescan something, which like it's like, I don't know, there's been 1 or 2 times where I want to keep both scans, but like I have the same thing. Like I put like 001A, like, but sometimes it corrupts, but like that's fine, right?
Yeah, you can do it.
Okay.
Especially for samples from police departments where there's like 4 different types of samples in one case file.
Yeah.
You do like LPD underscore 0001A, 001B.
So it's still that sample. Could you do that? I mean, technically, then I could do that if, let's say, I have one person who's coming with like multiple products. Then I can just be like, okay, so like this is under your person, like 002. So now I have, okay, well he gave me a little bit of cocaine, and then he gave me some like back and forth. Okay, that's really cool then.
Yep.
That's helpful for like grouping if someone has multiple substances.
Yeah, there should be some. Yeah, here 4997A. So very helpful. So then, once you have your spectrum loaded, you just double click it. You go to evaluate, spectrum search, and this is on. I think I have these like steps. Do this written out somewhere. But so first, I will do the whole spectrum. So I will use the entire file limit. So just scan 44,000 to 500 numbers. Search parameters. This is where you can change the hit quality. Down here. So you want to change the minimum hit quality to like 50. I typically don't go below 100, but if it's ever, it's just worth fiddling with sometimes. And then also select libraries. So currently, I have all these top 4. You can also see the words pharma. I'm going to uncheck them all, just for whatever reason I don't suspect this to be a pharmaceutical drug.
These are quite the check mark.
That is Bruker specific.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. But yeah, so then we have BCCSU, he's had demo.
It's like someone like, I want to be a part. Yeah. Why are you not checking the? Yeah.
So, for whatever reason, this is the oldest laptop, and my predecessor incorrectly loaded Georgia Crime Lab onto it, and I haven't figured out how to fix it. I tried to undownload it and re-download it, and I just couldn't do it. So,
Yeah, I was also just, I was like, oh, why Georgia specifically? Like, what do they do?
I don't really need that though. Like,
but our other, we have another laptop like this. I just don't use it often, but it's Georgia Crime Lab Center. So I'll give a check on that one. It's not a problem with Georgia.
Yeah.
I was also fiddling with the new surfaces that and adding libraries to them, and it's just a pain in the ass. Just horrible. But Fred from Bruker will be here tomorrow. And if you have any Bruker-related questions, please ask him. I don't know if he's actually offered that. He's
I was gonna say he come once he sees you, but I don't normally.
So he's coming. So I have basically most of the libraries other than Georgia Crime Lab and Farmer.
Oh, because they still are.
What the fuck is BSAS? What is that? No.
Bruker Optics Polymer Library.
Like plastics?
Yes.
What
Not
do you have that for?
Huh?
What do you have that for?
like check. I have no idea.
It just came with
It
that.
comes off the computer.
Like microplastics in the sample.
Yeah, I think so.
But more like not even microplastics. Like
I'm pretty sure it's on there.
I've never. See, I think
Yeah.
it's something
The option to try to be like a coating, like I was choosing that.
I've never done it. But so you check the libraries you want to check, and if you're going back and forth, you can uncheck, check them, and
Yeah.
go back and forth, do rounds. You hit search library, and your red spectra is your sample, and the blue. So these are all libraries, or different. So this top one's from BSAS. This one's
Yeah,
from SWG Drug.
Yeah, got it.
So I will stick with the first hit, and then you can do right click, shift curve, top, and you can do the top of the curve up and down, and you can try to line it up nicely. Then you can also do right click again, shift curve bottom, and this is just a lot of getting used to. And you can move the red baseline up and down, and then you can try to line it up. So you can also zoom. So this looks like very well lined up. Then you can zoom and you can make a box and look at like just this lower section.
So you're like trying to line it up to see if it actually aligns with that compound from the library, correct?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
So like if there was methamphetamine and something else,
Yeah, we have another one.
you'd have other
Stuff showing up that you have to
and we'll get
move
there.
around.
So
Cool.
yeah, so then you can zoom in to this area, and you can fiddle around in greater detail.
How'd you do that?
The zoom.
Yeah, just like create that little box.
Yeah, it's good.
Right click, zoom in, and then you click once, and then click again, and then click again.
And then just try.
So
Yeah, it's like first of the experience.
First step is the FTIR, second step is the meth lab.
Yeah, I was like first step. That was like machine, second step.
Slippery slope.
so
Don't tell the Republicans.
this red Manette sample very well lines up with all the blue peaks associated in the library standard. So that's, I would commonly say I only see meth. I don't really see any other major peaks that are not present. You can make the argument that this one is actually another peak. So like that's where you get really in the weeds. So you can zoom in a lot,
Yeah.
and then you're like, oh, the meth standard doesn't have a peak there. Is that another compound in a really low concentration? Maybe. And then you try to figure that out.
Good luck.
Yeah, essentially. But even over here, if I lower the red bottom baseline to here I'll shoot some all the way. Oh, that's ugly. No. Okay. As you can see, the more you zoom in from shift curve, and like, oh, I want to zoom in more on like the low peaks, you can see that the baseline, this is supposed to be like pure flat, basically, as like a standard. It's not. You can see all the jumpiness.
Right.
Versus like the one, they probably have a better FTIR for that. But because ours was run pretty quickly, it's going to have a slightly choppier baseline. And there are ways to improve your baseline, i.e. operate the FTIR in controlled conditions without massive changes in wind, temperature.
I mean, that's like a time too, like, so like there's been times where like you can see that there's something left, but like based on everything that all you say in front of you, like you're like, I don't know what the fuck this is. Like, and you can't really deduce, but like, so if it was like math and like, I would say it's probably like diagnostic cell phone, which is like the only kind that's ever really found in that, but that's like contextual knowledge, right?
Exactly.
But like sometimes like this is why like it's really helpful to like figure out like how to share information, how to share scans. So like I've sent scans to Sam, I'm like, it's fucking driving me crazy. Like I found 4 compounds, like there's also something in there that I can't figure out what the fuck it is for life to me. And like he'll come back with some crazy Miyagi shit and be like, see this tiny little peak here? That indicates a benzodiazepine.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck? Like how do you even know that? But like that's like how you learn. It's like when you're not sure, it's like kind of send it around. Like I mean, Cole, like we haven't done that yet, but maybe we should be friends. So.
I've been friends with
Excellent.
Aw.
said no one ever.
Like catch me on signal.
So while we're here, this, in my opinion, I can't see any other peaks that I would say are substantial. Like the one way down here was the one that maybe that's a peak. But I'm not confident enough to say that that's probably another compound, especially to any degree. I could call it a compound. I'll say it's meth, and like maybe there's something else, but wait for confirmatory testing. So I report this as meth and no identified inactive code. So that's that.
Meth. Yeah, but like meth.
So yay. You can see. So I'm gonna. Oh, so there's two unload options. I don't know. Unload and unload all. I typically just always do unload all because when you zoom in or fiddle around enough, it'll create you like tabs on the bottom here. And if you don't unload all, it can screw up your future analysis, and then you just have to unload all and do it again. So just I just would say just always hit the unload all and just go from scratch.
And always discard changes, right?
Always discard changes.
Always discard changes.
Pull another. Oh.
Do you have the confirmed testing of these?
Yes. And that one? Oh, that's a good question.
So that's fun.
Yeah, right, for like that little,
piece?
yeah, that little piece to see if there really was like the.
Does dimethyl sulfone, would that be an active ingredient called? I don't remember.
As an active, I think it would.
Yeah, probably. I can check out too.
What's the word?
Dimethyl sulfone. It's also known as MSM. I don't know why it's named that. But
MSM?
Dime, which is like really weird. Dimethyl sulfone, which is like one. This the only cut really that we ever see in that usually. Right? You ever see it?
Oh, so does everyone remember that spreadsheet with like all the tons of columns in it? This is that spreadsheet. So I'm just gonna jump over. So it's like, man, in Rockland.
Well, yours is, but I mean, isn't it? So.
Was in August. So that is that. But then the GC method, so this was the DDL code, the MT0206R code. They only identified meth. So this was, I say no inactive, I saw meth, and then I came back to meth.
So that was an actual sample then, that was.
Straight pure meth. Yeah.
Straight up, yeah.
And then this. It's really nice.
Yeah, I feel like this line looks so nicely, thank you, Brain.
I feel like I'd like get it again tomorrow.
Yeah. The worst is when you say non-identified and there's like 6
Yeah, they're like, actually, wow, really actually.
So then this last column is the clinical notes.
Yeah.
The one next to it is this one's, yeah, so that's that. So yes, they all have confirmed protocols. Good question. Next. Those fancy. So this is this other spectrum. You can already see when you're fully zoomed out that its baseline's kind of not great. It is what it is, but you still have some pretty prominent peaks that you'll be able to identify, hopefully.
Why is this one yellow?
No, they just always pop up. Like last one was blue, this one's yellow, next one might be red. And then the one, I think the second you then do a spectrum search, it auto defaults this to red and changes all the libraries to different colors. Which I can, but let's do evaluate spectrum search. Again, this was reported as not a pharmaceutical pill, so I'll keep the pharmacist turned off. And let's see what it comes up with. Okay. So. And I try to pick spectra that were crispy for the beginning, but they typically don't look like this. These are all, this one and the last one were nice samples. So, nearly all of the peaks line up very well between the sample and the library standard for cocaine. There's no real difference that we need to be concerned about between cocaine-free base, cocaine base, and just cocaine. They're all just the same thing, they just have different labeling. So I shouldn't really
So which is your sample, which is your library?
Red is the sample, and then blue is library. Yeah. And this blue one is from, they tell you up here, this is from the BCCSU library. And then when I click on the pink ones, this one is from TicTac.
Yeah.
So it populates all, it uses all your libraries available that you checked and gives you the top hits from each one, or like whatever the topic quality is. So, but then if you go, And there's just like a million things to share about opioids, but I will try to get through as much as I can without overwhelming everyone. So these are all library standards of cocaine, other than the red. The red's our sample.
So even though they start at lower peaks, you drag them out to see how they match.
Yep. So you right click, shift curve,
That's the same top.
and then you can, ideally you line up the baselines both above like 3600 and between 26 and 2000 quick numbers.
What's the difference between shifting top versus shifting bottom?
Good question. So when you shift the bottom, you're just going to lower the bottom. It's kind of,
Like the peak that's going down, it moves. Yeah, sorry, I'm not seeing what the difference is.
Yeah, right, you move up and down the pole.
yes, but so this is shifting up, so you're going to increase the maximum height of each. But so you can increase the maximum height of the peaks, and the bottom will kind of stay the same. But when you shift bottom, it's going to lower your lowest down.
Gotcha.
So then all these will continue to float lower.
Okay.
So you typically only move bottom to line it up with the other baselines that are present.
Yeah,
So
otherwise
like,
you wouldn't see some of it.
exactly.
Okay.
So like this blue's slightly higher than the other ones, so I'm gonna lower it with bottom and move it down so it's in line, so that it's nicely lined up.
I think the lows are nicely lined up.
Yeah.
Is fentanyl the only drug that has like, where you look up at a certain peak?
No, they all do.
Oh, okay, so it's something you can pick up on over time.
Yes.
So what would it be for cocaine?
Cocaine, I would great question. I typically, there's two peaks that I look for. There's two really dominant ones that I look for. It's this doublet, these two peaks right here, which is around, what's that, 17? 1705 and 1736. It'll be typically between like 1650 and 1750. It usually never ranges, like moves more than 50 wave numbers down our field. And then this other unique pile of peaks is pretty unique cocaine. Do I know what those are in relation to like were these departments here? I don't know. I just know it's common. If I want to look into it, I can, and it's all out there. But I cannot. But yeah, those are. I definitely look for this for cocaine and that double.
But then fentanyl has that same handy around 16 and 16 and 18. But fentanyl's got probably farther down.
It's a little bit more, right?
It's-
Yeah. So yeah, this is about 1612 is maybe. I think it's technically 1660. So if you saw it, you could probably be like right there.
Right.
But there is a chance. You're absolutely right. There's a chance that there's a little bit of fentanyl hiding underneath that cocaine peak, and it's being swamped, and you can't tell. So that is that.
Show us the confirmatory again.
Okay. BNC0015.
Oh wait, do we even have that yet?
Oh, first
I think I lied. Yeah, I think this is the new one.
Too new.
Sorry.
Stay tuned.
Hot off the press.
Yeah, I just identified. I actually think the next one is also a BNC sample. That is also new. Yeah. I think it's literally just the same sample. Just chemicals. But so that's cocaine.
So the one that says cells, let's see, trazodone, our answer on question. Cellulose helps pill.
Mm-hmm. So then we can go. We saw cellulose, the most common thing for packing pills, and trazodone.
Dried lemon peel?
So when you have the formal libraries on, it's also gonna like who said licorice? Sorry. Yeah. There's licorice. There's dried lemon peel. There's non-fat dairy milk. There's a bunch of just weird stuff that matches really well.
Weird. Oh, that wasn't a joke.
No, really, that's not that. It's stupid.
No, yeah, dried lemon peel. But also,
I think that was an actual, that was like somebody had left their prescriptions around, and so we just used one of the trazodone, like out of that bottle.
Yeah.
That was
That was the
something.
trazodone.
Yeah, that was like actual prescription pills.
and for whatever reason, I saw dried lemon peel, so I wrote it. Which makes basically no sense.
Also, that's
Seasonal drugs.
So, that's kind of so we'll go to the next one, which is NPPD. So this is what was happening with the Brockton EMHC samples, which is why I thought, yeah, it doesn't look like shit. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you get cut off in it.
Exactly, and I didn't know that that existed, despite my extensive background. These massive jumps are just because the FTIR does not do a good job of scanning below 515 bit numbers.
Yeah.
So you just cut it out. Which can happen to yours, but hopefully all the FTIRs that you have, you will then be able to know how to, or I can show you how to change. So you go to measure, advanced, and then you want to change it to 515. It's usually set to 358. But if you don't change it, you can go to cut, highlight, by direction. And then you can go to frequency range, and you can set this to 5. It doesn't make a huge difference if you cut off slightly more than you need. You can do that. And it auto realigns it. So that's very nice. You can do evaluate, spectrum search.
I need a nuclear reactor, so don't touch my phone.
So this first hit is lactose. And I'm gonna shift. You can also shift whole curve. Like these are like kind of nicely lined up. So I'm just gonna shift the whole thing. Move on. And then I see the red is slightly lower, so I'll shift it up. So it looks vast majority lactose. But if I look lower, it looks like there's some extra peaks, kind of like over here. It's like not perfectly lined up. Because if you have just lactose and you're comparing it to the library standard of lactose, the ratio of those peaks should be the exact same. So like where this red peak lines up with this blue should also perfectly line up with this red peak with this red blue, if that makes sense. But if it doesn't, there's like another compound, especially when it's So another thing that's very small is there's a slightly blurry but very pointy peak over here. So despite shifting also I would recommend using a mouse with this instead of a trackpad. It looks like there's an extra peak over here. So if I look search and I change it to just do a certain section, which is where this was what, 1600 to 1700. So I'll do like a little bit wider than that range, and I do search library. And then you can change the spectra. And then you can shift this down. So because we knew this was mostly lactose, that fentanyl peak is going to be really, really tiny. And despite it being the most prominent peak at 1620, it's still going to be really small in relation to all the lactose peaks. So even though there's another tall lactose peak at like 700-ish, it's going to be swamped absolutely. Or there might be a little indication of it. And it on top of the lactose. So that can help you identify fentanyl. And the more you have experience with looking at scans and the more samples you look through, you will be able to like better identify, like, oh, that looks like a fentanyl peak around like 1600 or so. So lines up with those two. Yeah.
Did you guys, I'm sorry for just swooping in at this point, but did you guys look at the caffeine one already? Did you look at that one?
Which caffeine?
Like the fentanyl caffeine, BCC2.
Like the slide?
Yeah.
No. You want to talk about it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sure, go.
This is good timing actually, because we're on the fentanyl one, but sorry. So over the last couple of years, one of the things that's been really challenging, I think, is that fentanyl's changed. Like it used to be that it was beautiful. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it was like there was no precursor, there was no intermediary, it was just fentanyl. And And you could see it really clearly, and that was because there was high concentration of it relative to, there's still a small concentration, but you'd have like 10 or 12%, like you'd be able to see it on the FTIR really easily. But as it got more, as it's changed and been, that's people making it in different places in different ways and with different starting materials, it still has unique traits on the spectra, but it's also the analogs complicate different places. So they all still have the spine or the structure of fentanyl, but so I think that 1610, 1650 area. What's interesting is if you go, I think it's the next slide. So,
sorry, I kind of reordered.
Oh, I'm sorry. Our friends at BC in British Columbia created like a nice collection of spectra. So you can see like the common spectra, here's what cocaine looks like, here's what, and so if you look at their fentanyl in BC is very heavily cut with caffeine. Well, caffeine and fentanyl actually overlap. So you have the problem if you see caffeine, we don't suspect caffeine often because we don't usually have it as a cut. It's mostly sugars as the cut. But you may come to their own conclusion. And their guidance, I was looking at it, I'm like, we never see this.
We just saw this the other day and it was really hard time.
What the hell is this?
Yeah, it was really hard. Yeah, it was yesterday.
And so if you want now starting to think like we should start to suspect maybe it is, but there are, so there's this suggestion, they don't mention 1610 at all, like that area. They actually mention a whole other section of the curve as the place where they identify fentanyl. I'm like, that is weird. Like they see different.
Like where the M is?
In that M.
Yeah.
And then,
but that's only like in concentrations of like, what is it, like 10 or above or something like that?
Yes.
Which we don't see a lot of often.
So this is one of those reasons where I'm like, okay, I love the Canadian guidance, but we probably need to come up with our own that make matches on regional BC.
But like, so if it had been like less fentanyl, like I would have had a really fucking hard time distinguishing the fentanyl and the FTIR. But because it was probably like 12% fentanyl, which is much higher than normal, like it was easier to tease out caffeine versus like, specifically because of that M, like I knew what that meant, and I also knew that like that was another identifying feature. But if not, like if it was like at 7% or lower, I probably would have been able to like tease out.
Just Vermont, the tester would have been the only thing that would have given you any clue that there was fentanyl in it.
Right.
Because she subtracted the caffeine first and it took away the fentanyl altogether. But then we did it again and took out the fentanyl first. But then the caffeine still remained, like we still see attributes of the caffeine, so.
Yeah, we had to play around with it.
So those on top of each other.
Yeah, exactly.
So these are kind of the nuances that like, we see so much fentanyl, and it's like, wait, this is weird, why is it like this?
Right.
But I put this together to really just remind ourselves like that we need to like be talking to each other and talking to like what we see. And then look out for logical challenges. Like I wouldn't have thought, why are they putting so much caffeine in the BC's drug supply? Like why would you put a stimulant in the opioid supply? But then I was like, well, this is what's logical? Why would you do it that way? Well, we are seeing more people putting a 4-fluorylphenol, which is an analog that creates more toxicity. Like maybe we're trying, there's an effort to kind of wake people up slightly. I don't know. Like maybe caffeine in there.
Coffee for color.
Yep.
Does it make it easier to smoke too, or am I thinking about a different compound?
Maybe different one. Yeah.
But
But who knows why? But there's
Yeah.
But xylazine is another one that's like can be hard to kind of see. But we don't have, we actually probably do need a version like their spectral library, like they have cheat sheets like this to help kind of go, okay, if you think it's fentanyl, look in this area. If you think it's cocaine, look in this area, which are really helpful. The machine sort of does it for you, but you've been needing to kind of get to know your drug supply and asking someone else to help. Yeah. Go for it.
Absolutely.
So going on to the next one, this one actually might not have confirmatory results as well. As a result, I'll go through that one. We'll skip 4 and go 5. Just QPD.
It's been like gray all day long. It's just looked like that all day outside.
Yeah.
I was like, what time is it? I have no idea.
Well, you don't feel bad about it.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Oh, these are just blue light glasses from Amazon. Thank you. Something happening because I put it in the
It's like I have it on the screen here, but it's just not.
It's not.
We're making a hard sell for the burger. That's what we're trying to do.
Grinders.
Oh, there it is! Look at that.
It's very impressive, right? It's like a way that I'm watching this.
Okay, sure. Okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna. Sometimes it does this as well. It just like you load a library and then it automatically does a spectrum search.
Yeah.
So, does that?
Yeah, I happens to us all the time. It's weird.
I think it's just a bug. But is it a bug? PD, line, and then I'll just go. You can just override it with doing a spectrum search. This one was also not a pill, if I remember correctly, so I'm going to keep the Karma library turned off. Don't expect any plastic polymers in there, and Georgia Crime Lab is still unchecked for this. We'll do this. And the first step, paracetamol. Let's see how well it lines up. I don't know off the top of my brain what paracetamol is.
Instead of that, it's just like
I don't know.
situation here.
That makes sense, because next one's
Huh?
perfect. So this is the chemical name for Tic Tac versus versus HWG drug uses the brand name. So you can keep both checked. And that's the other thing, you can have a bunch of spectra up on your screen at once and like compare. Like if you want fentanyl, lactose, mannitol all at once, you can do that. And you can have all the spectra like overlapping one another to help see which peaks are present. But so it looks like the peaks over here line up really well for paracetamol or acetaminophen. Yeah, so I would say those look like they line up pretty well with paracetamol. And that's a pretty unique peak pattern with like consistent peaks one after another without any overlap. So I would say that's pretty likely to have some paracetamol on it, or acetaminophen. But there's still this massive peak over here representing a major component of the compound, which we can then go to about 11, say 1200 to 900. Search. And we'll see what comes in there. Licorice. Nice. So as you can see, and also peanuts another one. Peanuts
See?
Yeah.
But more likely it's going to be lactose.
It loves to tell you the shit is like
You can compare the two.
Holding your hands level crash.
So it looks like there's lactose in this as well.
Is that right?
Weird. Pretty low.
You're being weird.
It's true.
Sweet, that's naturally.
So it's, but it's not a perfect overlap. So there's a chance that it's lactose. See, that's a big.
So you don't do the subtraction method, right? So is there a reason why you, like, these are two legitimate approaches, right? It's just different, like, we would still use this, like the you know, search specific keys or whatever, but is there a reason why you don't do the subtraction method?
Because at least that I found, I think I gave up on it very quickly. So auto subtract a new search is that other option. So we're like, we're pretty sure it's paracetamol. So we can go auto subtract a new search and it'll then take the subtraction of the spectra and tell you what's next. But the problem that it does, that I always see, is it bottoms out something, it over subtracts something.
Yeah, of course it does, right? But isn't there also some risk of, like, if you focus on one specific, because like there are some things, like for example, like caffeine and fentanyl share a peak in the same place, or very similar place. Isn't there, don't you run the risk of taking like that one snapshot of, like, say, like I call for like a fingerprint, that you would misidentify something? I mean, so far, like everything works. I'm just saying, like, I'm just trying to backtrack on like what I was trying to do, and like, because we do this, but it's usually like we can't do some class subtraction. Sometimes subtraction is stupid. It does over subtract things and things happen, whatever. Like I would say there's definitely either lactose or mannitol in there.
Yeah.
But if you're looking on that end of the spectrum and you're saying you're not sure if it's lactose, like I can tell that's definitely lactose. Like I would sacrifice my mother to this fucking angry volcano.
So part of the reason I say look for that 1600 fentanyl peak is because typically all the other peaks are swamped in any other, whenever there's anything else relevant. But if you have lactose, for example, looking for that pretty common clump of peaks around like 1100. If you look at just 1100, that can give you a hint of its being lactose, but then you should still confirm, I'm kind of just going through quickly, but you should confirm that the other peaks of lactose are still there and they're correlated ratio. It's like the lactose peak over here. If this was completely flat over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you can agree with that. Yes.
Yeah, I just wonder if like I want to give these like both approaches. Like I want to make sure that like I'm not doing something that's, you know, yeah, I want to use the most accurate approach. But for us, like the subtraction has worked, but maybe that's just because you have like relatively simple.
So it was lactose and so we'll say
way too. But this is like when you know this like that, I would definitely like that. I can think of like several times reason why we should have done some of this, like sort of like backtracking, like doing because you've done both. We just have done the opposite order of like what you're talking about. But so as long as you do the same fucking result,
so this was unknown number 5, and then for the last one of today we'll do unknown number 6.
This should keep bringing up for the map. Rather than just looking at the whole thing and subtracting it.
I don't know how these other computers, I think they're going to see them. What happens, like a acetaminophen, like creates an effect.
Right.
Added in, and we should be prepared to probably do both.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we have underused like the searching of the peaks, which is why like this is helpful for me.
Yeah.
Because there's like oftentimes like shit that like I'm like this, it's not in there, it's not in there.
Yeah.
This is good.
There's that mixture analysis within Opioids too. It's like a third.
Yeah. And I do that, but it's like a crapshoot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
basically, I don't trust anything.
this one, on looking at the entire spectra, looks a lot like lactose.
Yeah.
So you can do the first. Let's do the first. I'm curious because I didn't try this with the subtraction method. So let's do it with this. Would you subtract lactose first, or would you try to subtract?
I would generally subtract lactose first. Yeah.
Okay. So let's try. I'll just subtract it.
Sometimes it's crapshoot. Like sometimes you go subtract something and you don't pencil, and then you would search that peak right there, or you could obviously see the
So this is the
but it's good to know that there are two methods. Like everything just depends on like how your brain works. Like there should be multiple ways to reach the conclusion as long as it's the right conclusion, as it's giving us the right information every time it's not.
Is this an analog? Do you know?
That's right. And then
clotting, the, like that peak. Yeah, the green, what is that?
I've seen that. But I wasn't kidding.
Okay. Like the green is beautiful, but that's like from the lab.
Right.
Perfect standards.
It is
Look like this.
Right.
And
It is
then
not an analog. There is fentanyl and precursor, but there's not an analog. But more interesting, which I actually didn't see the first time I went through the scan, but once I got the confirmed results, I went back and was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense to find that. I'll go back to the first section. So we're here. So we see this like additional peak over here.
yeah.
So we can do that. Good evaluate. We're gonna look just in that. So we got fentanyl from the auto subtract method. So that was accurate because both peaks, two of the major peaks were present on the spectrum. Like they weren't completely swapped out. But so fentanyl comes down on a lower floor. So you do have to go kind of like through all these and see like are these logical to be in this, and that comes with practice and experience and knowing what. And a lot of it is just Googling. Like I don't know what you and I try this off the top of my brain, but some people will, and some of it you could just Google. So it seems that this fentanyl peak, the sharp fentanyl peak at 1637, 1640. But there's this other peak to the side of it that doesn't seem to be in a typical ratio of this foster plot. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So I didn't realize this at the time, but maybe it's here. So there's a ton of different fentanyl analogs in the library as well. But because they're so structurally similar, some of them will have unique peaks relative to one another. Like butyl fentanyl will have like an extra peak somewhere because of that extra butyl group. And you can identify that and look at libraries and see like, oh, that might actually be my compound, but it's probably better to wait for confirmatory results and just say it's a fentanyl or analog. Like you're not gonna be able to say it with great confidence. I wish it would show up. So despite me knowing what it is, the library is not doing a great job of
But it is just like straight up fentanyl hydrochloride.
It is fentanyl hydrochloride.
Like that's what it confirmed yeah.
Yes. But the other thing is, which I wish I could show a better way to explain it, is this is actually, I'll give the answer because I know the struggle. It's xylazine. Hiding under that fentanyl peak and hiding under the lactose as well.
Is that right?
Yep.
Can you show us that?
Sure. Do you have a Georgia Crime Lab on and it might pop up?
This is the laptop that Georgia Crime does.
Oh, damn
But we do have SW, so, that's
Was that in the BCCSU too, right?
exactly. So
Yeah,
I'm
so
gonna
we
go.
should try and see if we can push it out.
So I'll just take off all these other ones that are providing these crappy hits. And actually, is it in TikTok? I don't know. Oh, we'll just do pieces. So now that it at least popped up, you can also change colors. Like so.
What color is that? I mean, which color is that?
We're gonna make xylazine dark green. So then we can zoom in here. So xylazine also has this like shoulder lump around 2700.
Yeah.
Like methamphetamine also has this. I'll take all that pictures on that. So this has xylazine. There's no fentanyl here as well. But so we know it's still going to be primarily lactose, so we have to put the xylazine concentration very low. And the most dominant two peaks in xylazine are this kind of lobster claw look-alike doublet around 1600 as well, so a little bit lower. But it lines up really well with that unidentified peak from earlier. So I'll just do this. And sadly, this is all those lactose swamps, so that other major peak on the lower fingerprint region way down here is not going to show up. None of those are really going to show up. But this lobster claw right there.
Yeah, it's like, I would say like, that's possibly xylazine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I didn't see it the first time I went through. I only went back because I got the confirmatory results. I was like, oh, there's xylazine. And it's
If
in
you're
my
in a rush, that way you wouldn't catch that. That's
definitely not in a rush.
Yeah.
And just for a fun fact, that was in a ratio of, doesn't tell you the lactose, but it was 80 parts fentanyl, 50 parts xylazine, and then 10 parts precursors. So like it should have been picked up in theory, but it is still a really low concentration relative to the lactose, so that's where finding xylazine is super difficult.
That's like the only shit that happens like when you do this in a while. I wouldn't have thought that.
We should maybe, because all of our sites are seeing so much xylazine, maybe we should try to be like xylazine nervelings and try to figure out like ways to tricks for the trick.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't
That's
tested
all.
a single dope bag in over a year that hasn't had trick in it, so.
Yeah.
I mean,
We don't have it as
if
much,
that-
but.
if it was like 80% trick, that would have been a higher peak, or that peak would stay the same.
Some of the other patterns would have been more prominent. Yeah. And you might look at other parts of the curve, like the end thing. That should sort of kind of like in the, I think it's the 25 range. And what's the and there's one other factor around 7%. But there's often other stuff happening there with lactose. You can miss it. So.
During this in my, the kids were playing soccer tape.
Hey.
So. Okay, same picture. Sorry.
This is one of those reasons why I do love to the fact that people get information. How did I miss this? Or are you kind of like doing it for a while and there's still stuff?
So this sample doesn't have confirmatory results yet, but we can take a look at it together. Allison, this is that makes me very sleepy sample.
Okay, sure. He was really excited to get results. Look at the when you had looked at the scan cold pill, you talked to him, right? Yeah. So thank you.
So the first bit, no, okay, focus. The first hit that comes up is xylazine, which is ludicrous, because that's not defined. This is a high proportion of xylazine. So the major red peak, it's like majority xylazine, at least the bit that was scanned. Obviously it can't be perfectly homogeneous throughout, but very high concentration of xylazine.
That's interesting. He said like regularly, right? What? Like regularly that had been happening, or he was getting really sleepy?
Yeah, and to other people, it had been happening to them, that they were feeling sleepy.
Yeah. So that's a high proportion of xylazine. Way less common. Typically very, very common. But the sample finds it very.
Was it positive for fentanyl too on the fentanyl tester?
Yep.
I think so.
It was fentanyl, protein, xylazine. So yeah. Let's end there for today.